This is the 2019 Santa Cruz Blur. It is the matte black. It's the single C version of the Blur. You can see the logo is sort of like a beige, off-white. There's a few aspects of it that you don't quite, well, you do see these online, but it's nice to see in person. There's some purple accents. Purple's carried over onto the fork as well. Can't see it in the camera as well. But the 32 here on the fork is purple. Overall, it's a really great bike. I'm coming from the Santa Cruz 5010. I ride an XL 5010, and this is a large Blur. And I prefer smaller bikes. So this bike is absolutely blazing fast for me. Being able to just whip it around turns. And all told, this is exactly 6 pounds lighter than my XL Santa Cruz. My XL Santa Cruz has some beefier pedals. These are the XTR trail pedals. So my Santa Cruz weighed in at 30.6, and this weighs in at exactly 24.6. Huge difference, completely different bikes. Santa Cruz, I don't really have to think about where I'm riding. It'll just soak up any bit of the trail, but it's a lot slower. Whereas this bike is just blazing fast. You do have to consider your lines, but its handling and maneuverability are off the charts, and the thing climbs amazingly. A couple of issues that I've had with the bike, which aren't terrible. I had the same issue on the 5010, except a little bit differently. On the 5010, for my bottle cage, I had to, if you can see that, I had to file this little mount down so that it would fit in the crook of the XL size frame. The mounts on the 5010 are way down here, and so this barely fits in there. And the issue here with the Blur is how these cables are routed and where these mounts come in. It makes it very awkward for this bottle cage to fit in here. You can get it in there and get it mounted, but then the cables sort of interfere with the bottle being inserted into the cage. Not to mention that once this is actually between these cables, you will encounter some rubbing issues on the cage itself. So not ideal. There is a mount underneath that you could use here. Not too much of a fan of that placement. So I have to think about this a little more and how I'm going to mount a bottle cage. I'll probably just make that work. Another little issue I ran into is the dual shock lock remote. This mount is very, very fragile. I think the total newtons of force that you're supposed to tighten it is, a friend told me, is like 1.2, and I probably gave it about 2 newtons of torque, and there's a little piece here that snapped off of the bottom so that the bolt would no longer hold, so I had to put a zip tie on it. Kind of not what you expect with a high-end bike like this. I might take it back to the bike shop to have it serviced. Other than that, it's really great so far. Haven't had a chance to really use the 12th gear here. I live in southeast Michigan, so the trails are mostly flat. A lot of punchy climbs, just haven't had a need for it. A lot of reviews complained about these tires as not being knobby enough. I haven't had any issues with traction. I do run high pressure, so I'm kind of surprised that they tracked as well as they did. So I might decrease the pressure in the tires. And after purchasing this bike, I'm gonna get rid of my 5010 and sell it. This bike is extremely capable. I had no problems hitting all the same trails that I normally did on my trail bike. And I did not really experience any downsides to riding this XC race-centric bicycle on some moderately technical trails. Oh, one other consideration that I was worried about was this dual remote lockout. So it's either an all or setting. You either ride it locked out or completely open. And in the completely open setting, the shocks, both the shocks are completely open. And if you're not accustomed to riding with your shocks completely open, you know, perhaps you ride with your shock settings in the middle range, which is somewhere between climbing and downhill. You don't have that option here. Although in practice, when I actually ride the bike, I do not notice. Could be the VPP takes out all of the pedal bob that would be a concern normally. But all told, there was really no issue. And if you did have an issue, you can either adjust the cable stop here or use the barrel settings here to adjust the way that two sort of binary settings adjust the damper on the shocks. A couple other things. This preload nut might be unfamiliar to you the first time you see it. If you get this bike and you can twist this preload separate from the actual crank arm, then what you need to do is tighten this preload nut all the way down to the bottom bracket, and then use a small Allen to tighten this bolt so that it doesn't spin anymore. What that does is it removes any give, horizontal give in the spindle, instead of having a set number of spacers in between here. And then why I'm back here, if you've never seen a VPP linkage before, there's this sort of concealed cave of a linkage system, and after every ride you'll see a ton of dirt back here. So I usually try to like take a brush and brush it out, or just run some water from a bucket or something softly through there to try to get it out. It'll never stay completely clean, but I've never really had an issue with it on my Santa Cruz 5010. Then also, of course, new on the Blur is they've added another linkage arm. On the 5010, there's only one of these vertical arms, and you just have this part of the rear triangle. But on the Blur, you have both linkage arms on the rear triangle. Yeah, so all told, amazing bike, just like all the reviews say. A few minor issues, which I'll probably address in the coming months. But if you are upgrading to an XC race bike but still want a slight touch of trail in your bike, then this is the bike for you. And I'll be racing this all season. I have a first race coming up this weekend. Thanks.